The professional basketball world just got hit by something it has never seen before. Not a trade, not a rivalry, not a contract holdout. What just happened in the last 48 hours inside the Indiana Fever organization and the WNBA's front office corridors has completely rewritten the rulebook on player power, loyalty, and what it truly means to stand up for someone when the entire corporate machine is lined up against them. The sport will never look the same after this. And if you think you already know the full story, buddy, you are not even close. Because here's the thing, the headlines are covering the surface. The sports talk shows are debating the drama, but nobody is breaking down every single layer of this explosive situation the way we are about to right now. We are going inside the locker room, inside the boardroom, inside the panic-stricken emergency meetings, and inside the minds of the two women who just decided they have had enough. Clark and Sophie Cunningham have drawn a line in the sand so deep and so wide that the entire WNBA establishment is standing at the edge of it, staring down and absolutely sweating through their expensive suits, trying to figure out what on earth they are supposed to do next. Stay locked in because this one is going to shake you. To understand why this ultimatum carries the weight that it does, you have to understand exactly what kind of season the WNBA has been living through in 2026. This has not been a normal year. The intensity on the court has been dialed up to a level that the league has never quite experienced before. The physicality of the game, the competitive stakes, the sheer volume of eyeballs watching every single play, all of it has created an environment where every moment is magnified and every controversy gets amplified 1,000 times over. And right in the dead center of all that noise has been Sophie Cunningham. Now, if you have been watching the 2026 season with any level of attention, you already know that Cunningham has been one of the most polarizing figures in the entire sport. The hard fouls, the ejections, the moments that sent the internet into an absolute frenzy every single time they happened. Cunningham plays with an edge that some people call grit and others call recklessness, and that divide in opinion has turned into one of the loudest, most relentless media storms the women's game has ever produced. Fans have been viciously split right down the middle on her. On one side, you have the people who see her as the embodiment of competitive fire, a player who refuses to be pushed around and refuses to apologize for playing the game the way she believes it should be played. On the other side, you have the critics, the sports journalists, the social media accounts, and the corporate voices who have been hammering her week after week, calling her dirty, calling her dangerous, calling her a liability that the league needs to address before things spiral even further out of control. And then, layered on top of all of that, you have the culture war element, the broader social debates that have attached themselves to her story and made the conversation around Sophie Cunningham about something far bigger than basketball. The pressure has been absolutely relentless, and eventually, that pressure started reaching the people sitting in the very expensive chairs at Indiana Fever headquarters. Here is where the story gets dark. Behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the press conferences and the carefully worded public statements, something deeply troubling started happening inside the Fever organization. Whispers began circulating. Quiet conversations started taking place in rooms that the players were never supposed to hear about. And the substance of those conversations, once they started leaking out, revealed something that nobody inside that locker room was prepared to accept. Reports began surfacing from sources close to the organization that Indiana Fever executives were growing increasingly uncomfortable with the non-stop media circus that had built up around Cunningham. And when corporate executives get uncomfortable, they do not get uncomfortable quietly. They start looking for solutions. They start having the kind of meetings where spreadsheets and sponsorship valuations and brand perception metrics get discussed, and the actual human beings those numbers represent get reduced to line items on a damage control report. The options being discussed were brutal: benching her, trading her away, or the nuclear option, cutting ties with Sophie Cunningham entirely to quiet the negative noise and send a message to the league's corporate partners that the Fever were taking the public relations situation seriously. The front office, by multiple accounts, believed they could handle this quietly. They believed they could make a clean, controlled move, absorb a few days of sports media attention, and then watch the storm blow over. They had done the calculation in their heads, weighed the optics, and decided that pushing Cunningham out was the move that protected the franchise's bottom line.
What those executives failed to account for was the person standing right next to Sophie Cunningham every single day. The one person in the entire league whose voice carries enough weight to make the front office's calculated plan completely fall apart before it ever gets off the ground. They forgot about Caitlin Clark, and that was the most catastrophic mistake they could have possibly made. When the rumors about what the front office was planning reached Caitlin Clark, she did not call her agent. She did not post a cryptic message on social media. She did not pull a trusted reporter aside and whisper something off the record. No. According to reports coming out of sources close to the situation, Clark went directly to the source. She walked straight into those conversations with the kind of energy that comes from someone who has been the most important person in a room for their entire professional life and knows exactly how to use that position when it matters most. And what she delivered was not a complaint. It was not a plea. It was not a carefully worded diplomatic expression of concern for her teammate. It was an ultimatum, clean, direct, and with absolutely zero room for misinterpretation. If you push Sophie Cunningham out of this organization, I am done. Not a negotiation, not a temporary holdout, done. As in, Caitlin Clark walks away from the Indiana Fever, walks away from the WNBA, and takes everything she represents, every television rating, every sold-out arena, every sponsorship dollar attached to her name, with her. Rumors suggest that the delivery of this ultimatum left the room completely silent, because everyone in that room understood in real time what they were looking at. This was not a bluff from a player frustrated with a coaching decision or unhappy about her minutes. This was a calculated, deliberate act of power from a woman who understands exactly what she means to this league and is completely willing to weaponize that reality to protect someone she stands behind. The front office thought they were managing a media problem. Caitlin Clark just turned their media problem into an existential crisis. Let's be very clear about something. When most athletes issue ultimatums, the front office does a quick calculation, weighs the player's contract value against the disruption cost, and usually finds a comfortable middle ground that lets everyone save face. That is the standard playbook. It has worked 1,000 times across professional sports history. But that playbook does not apply here, and the reason it does not apply comes down to one simple, undeniable truth about what Caitlin Clark actually means to the WNBA as a business. Clark did not just become a great basketball player. She became the engine of an entire economic transformation. When she entered the league, she brought with her an audience that women's professional basketball had never been able to reach before. Millions of casual sports fans who had never once sat down to watch a WNBA game were suddenly buying tickets, tuning in to broadcasts, following the league on social media, and engaging with the sport in ways that shattered every historical metric the league had ever recorded. Television ratings surged to levels that had the major broadcast networks completely rethinking their investment in women's basketball. Arenas that had been half full for years were suddenly selling out weeks in advance. The Caitlin Clark effect was not a talking point. It was a measurable, documented, financially transformative phenomenon. And the sponsors followed the audience. Major global brands poured money into the league at a pace that WNBA executives had spent decades dreaming about, but never actually experiencing. Multi-year deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars were signed on the back of the league's suddenly explosive growth. Broadcast rights fees went up. Merchandise revenue went up. The entire financial architecture of the modern WNBA was rebuilt around the foundation of Caitlin Clark's presence in the league. So when Clark says she is willing to walk away, she is not threatening to remove one player from one roster. She is threatening to pull the central support beam out of a building that the entire league is currently standing inside. That is why the front office is not sleeping right now. That is why the emergency meetings are happening. That is why the league's most powerful people are sitting in rooms together trying to figure out an exit from a corner they walked themselves directly into.
The moment reports of Clark's ultimatum started leaking beyond the walls of the Indiana Fever organization, the reaction at WNBA headquarters was immediate, and it was severe. By multiple accounts, the league's commissioner and senior officials were pulled into emergency sessions almost instantly, the kind of meetings that nobody scheduled in advance, where people get called in from wherever they are and told to drop everything because something has gone sideways in a way that requires immediate attention at the highest level. And what made those meetings particularly brutal was the reality check sitting at the center of every conversation. Every scenario they ran through ended the same way. If Clark follows through, the damage is catastrophic. The broadcast partners who paid enormous sums for the rights to air WNBA games are not paying for a product that no longer includes Caitlin Clark. Those contracts get complicated very quickly. The global sponsors who attach their brands to the league's growth story have to immediately reassess whether the story they bought into still exists. The ticket revenue, the jersey sales, the streaming numbers, all of it built on the assumption that Clark is on the court, playing, drawing audiences, being the face of the league every single night. Reports suggest that the scramble inside league headquarters has been genuinely frantic. Officials trying to figure out whether they have any leverage in this situation at all, whether there are contract clauses or league rules that give them any ability to push back against what Clark is demanding, whether there's any version of this story where they come out looking like they handled it with any degree of competence or authority. And the answers they keep arriving at are not encouraging, because the truth of the matter is that the WNBA created this situation themselves. They allowed the media pressure to build around Cunningham without actively defending her. They let the whispers about internal discussions reach the locker room, and in doing so, they handed Caitlin Clark exactly the kind of moment that a competitor of her caliber turns into a defining statement. While the suits are panicking behind closed doors, the reaction playing out in public has been something else entirely. The moment this story broke, social media transformed into an absolute battlefield. Every sports account, every fan page, every analyst with a microphone or a keyboard had something to say, and the volume of the conversation has been overwhelming. Major sports networks interrupted their regular programming to cover the story live. Analysts on television were visibly struggling to process the implications of what they were reporting in real time. The debate exploded across every platform simultaneously. On one side of the conversation, Clark's supporters, and there are millions of them, have been absolutely electric. The response from fans who have watched her transform the league has been fierce and unified. The message from that corner of the internet has been simple. She is doing exactly what a leader is supposed to do. She is using her power to protect someone who doesn't have the platform she does. And if the league folds because of it, that is entirely on the people who created the situation. The support has been loud, passionate, and completely unrelenting. But on the other side, the skeptics and the critics have been just as vocal. Sports commentators have been asking whether this kind of player leverage is healthy for the league long-term, whether one player having this much economic power over an entire organization sets a dangerous precedent, whether the WNBA, in its effort to build around Clark's star power, accidentally created a situation where a single player can hold the entire institution hostage. It's a legitimate debate, and it is one that the league is going to have to grapple with, whether they want to or not. Because this situation has made one thing undeniable. The traditional power structures in professional sports are getting tested in ways that nobody in a front office was fully prepared for.
The most fascinating part of the online reaction has been watching longtime sports personalities who rarely comment on WNBA matters suddenly feel compelled to weigh in. Names that have nothing to do with women's basketball on a day-to-day basis have been posting takes, sharing clips, and throwing their platforms behind one side or the other. That kind of crossover attention is itself a testament to how massive this story has become. This is not a women's sports story anymore. This is a professional sports story. Full stop.
Here is what has been the most striking element of this entire situation as it has continued to develop. In the days since Clark's ultimatum became public knowledge, neither she nor Sophie Cunningham has blinked, not once. There have been no carefully managed PR statements walking back the severity of what was said, no agents going on background to clarify that the situation is more nuanced than it appears, no social media posts designed to soften the edges of the confrontation and signal to the front office that there is room to negotiate. Nothing. Just two players standing exactly where they stood when this started, shoulder to shoulder, completely immovable. That kind of solidarity is exceptionally rare in professional sports. The default move for anyone involved in a public confrontation with a front office is to eventually find a way to de-escalate, to give the organization something they can use to frame the situation as resolved. The public and private pressures that get applied to players in these situations are enormous. Agents counsel caution, lawyers outline contract implications, teammates worry about the ripple effects on the rest of the roster, sponsors get nervous. And usually, somewhere in all of that noise, the player finds a reason to pull back just enough to let the institution save face and move on. Clark and Cunningham have not given anyone that opening. And the longer they hold that position, the more uncomfortable the league's situation becomes. Because every day that passes without a resolution is another day of uncertainty for the sponsors, another day of headlines the league cannot control, another day of the narrative being written entirely by the two players the front office is trying to manage, rather than by the organization itself. The WNBA is used to being able to shape its own story. Right now, Clark is the one holding the pen. What makes their bond particularly significant is the context in which it developed. Clark came into the league as the most hyped arrival in women's basketball history. The pressure on her from day one was unlike anything any player in the league had ever experienced. Cunningham, a veteran with years in the league before Clark's arrival, became one of the first players to publicly and genuinely embrace Clark's presence without any of the complicated feelings that sometimes surface when a new player arrives and immediately gets more attention than everyone who came before. Their relationship is built on something real. And when Clark decided to put her career on the line for that relationship, the WNBA got a very public lesson in what it looks like when genuine human loyalty collides with institutional calculation. There is a conversation happening underneath all the drama and the hot takes and the ultimatum coverage that deserves more attention than it is currently getting. Because what Clark just did is not just about Sophie Cunningham. It is not just about one roster decision at one franchise. What she just did is a signal that the fundamental relationship between players and institutions in professional women's sports is changing, and it is changing faster than the people running those institutions are prepared to handle. For most of its history, the WNBA operated in an environment where the league held nearly all the leverage. Player salaries were modest compared to other professional leagues. The financial options available to players outside of their WNBA contracts, playing overseas, securing endorsements independently, existed, but not at a scale that gave players the kind of negotiating power that would make a league office genuinely nervous. The institution was always the one holding the cards. The players showed up, played the game, and worked within the structure that was handed to them, because the alternative was not economically viable for most of them.
Clark changed that equation in a fundamental way the moment she entered the league. She brought with her an earning potential, an endorsement profile, and a cultural cachet that made her financially independent of the WNBA in a way that virtually no women's basketball player before her had ever been. Her Nike deal, her other brand partnerships, her media presence, none of that disappears if she walks away from the league. She is not making this threat from a position of financial desperation. She is making it from a position of genuine, documented financial independence. And that means the WNBA cannot simply wait her out the way institutions typically wait out players who are making noise. The clock works differently when the player threatening to leave is not economically dependent on the league for her livelihood. This is the precedent that is making people in professional sports front offices genuinely anxious right now, not just in the WNBA, across the board. Because if Caitlin Clark demonstrates that a player can successfully force a league's hand on a roster decision by leveraging her own irreplaceable value and her own financial independence, other players in other leagues are watching. The dynamic of institutional power versus player power is going to look different on the other side of this situation than it does right now, regardless of how it resolves. The WNBA is standing at a crossroads right now, and both paths forward come with enormous consequences. If the league folds to Clark's demands, guarantees Cunningham's spot on the roster, and publicly backs her up against the media pressure that has been building around her all season, they avoid the immediate catastrophe. Clark stays, Cunningham stays, the financial machine keeps running, the sponsors breathe, the broadcast partners relax, the crisis gets managed. But in managing it, the league establishes something they will have to live with for a very long time. They establish that Caitlin Clark has the power to determine roster decisions, that a player with enough leverage can walk into a front office and dictate terms in a way that the organization cannot refuse. Every future negotiation, every future roster decision, every future situation where a player decides to push back against institutional authority is going to be measured against the precedent set right here, right now. And if the league calls her bluff, if they decide to proceed with whatever they were planning to do with Cunningham and test whether Clark actually follows through, that path is almost too catastrophic to fully map out. If Clark walks, the sponsors start asking questions the league cannot answer. The broadcast partners start having conversations the league does not want to have. The fans who only recently found their way into women's basketball because of Clark start drifting away. The economic momentum that has been building for years slows down in a way that could take a decade to recover from. The WNBA would survive. Institutions like this always find a way to survive, but the version of the WNBA that exists on the other side of Caitlin Clark walking away is a significantly smaller, significantly less financially powerful, significantly less culturally relevant version of the league that exists today. There are no clean options here. The front office created a situation with no easy exits, and now they have to find their way through it while two players who have no intention of making it easy for them stand on the other side of the table and wait. Somewhere in the middle of all the contract language and the financial projections and the emergency meetings and the social media firestorm, there's a human story at the center of this that is worth pausing on for just a moment. Because stripped of all the institutional drama and the economic stakes and the sports media noise, what Caitlin Clark did was look at a teammate who was being targeted by forces larger than herself and decide that she was not going to let that happen without a fight.
She did not have to do this. She is the face of the league. She has the most secure position of anyone in the WNBA. She could have kept her head down, let the front office handle their business, watched Cunningham get moved out, and continued being exactly what she already is, the most important player in the history of the modern league. Nobody would have criticized her for staying in her lane. In fact, plenty of people would have quietly respected her for not creating additional chaos in an already chaotic season. But that is not who Caitlin Clark is. And in choosing to put her career on the line for her teammate, she did something that transcends basketball. She demonstrated a model of leadership that the sports world does not see very often. Not the kind that comes with a captain's armband and a pre-game speech. The kind that shows up when the stakes are real and the cost is personal, and the easiest thing to do is look the other way. That kind of leadership is rare. It is the kind that people remember long after the games are over and the scores are forgotten. Sophie Cunningham is not the most famous player in the WNBA. She does not have the endorsement profile or the cultural reach of her teammate. She is a grinder, a veteran, someone who does the hard, unglamorous work that makes a team function even when the cameras are focused on someone else. And when the machine started moving against her, the most powerful person in the building stepped in front of it. That says something about both of them that no stat line will ever fully capture. What started as a locker room situation inside one franchise has rapidly become one of the most significant moments in the history of professional women's sports. And the reason it has grown to that scale is because it touches on things that matter far beyond the question of which players are on which roster at the end of the week. This is about power. Who actually holds it? Who has historically been told they do not get to have it? And what happens when that assumption gets challenged by someone with enough standing to make the challenge real? Women's professional sports have spent decades operating inside a framework where the players were always the ones asked to be grateful for the opportunity, to work within the system, to accept the terms they were given because the alternative was a league that might not exist at all. And in many ways, that framework was a practical response to real financial constraints that genuinely limited what was possible for a long time. But Caitlin Clark represents something new. She represents a player who does not need to operate inside that framework because she has built something for herself that exists outside of it. And when she chose to use that position not to extract better personal terms, but to defend someone else, it changed the conversation entirely.
The WNBA is at an inflection point. The league that comes out on the other side of this moment, however it resolves, is going to be different from the one that went in. The relationship between players and institutions has been permanently altered. The question of who holds leverage in professional women's basketball has been answered in a way that nobody in a front office was fully ready for. And two women, standing shoulder to shoulder in the middle of an absolute firestorm, refusing to budge a single inch, are the ones who forced that answer out into the open. The ball is in the WNBA's court, and every single person watching this situation is waiting to see what they do with it. The question is not whether this story has consequences. The question is what kind of consequences and who ends up having to live with them. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. What is your read on this situation? Did Caitlin Clark just make the boldest move in the history of professional sports? Or has this gone somewhere that even she cannot fully control? This conversation is just getting started. If you want to stay ahead of every breaking development in this situation and every other explosive moment happening across the sports world, hit that subscribe button right now. This story is far from over.